Did a court fail to adequately consider an application for youthful offender treatment? To find out, you have to read People versus Rivera, but it's 9 pages. Don't have time for that? I've got you covered. This is TLDR, Too Long Didn't Read, where I cover New York Court of Appeals cases, and I try to do it in 5 minutes or less. This is the episode on the case of People versus Rivera. The citation for this case is 2023 New York Slip Opinion 05967, published by the New York Court of Appeals on November 21st of 2023. The issue in this case is whether the court, in these circumstances, failed to exercise its discretion in whether or not to grant youthful offender adjudication. To understand and appreciate the context of this case, you have to know that CPL, Criminal Procedure Law 720.10, discusses the eligibility requirements and the procedures for youthful offender adjudication. Youthful offender is an attractive alternative to a felony conviction because the sentences are much lower. But it's also very restricted in terms of who can get it, and who's entitled to it, and whether it's mandatory or discretionary. So what is a youth under youthful offender? It's defined in that section as a person who's at least 16 and less than 19. So it's 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. Every such youth is eligible unless, and then there's a bunch of exceptions, one of which is the person previously got a felony conviction. So if you have a previous felony conviction, you're not eligible. Later on in the statute, it says, but a youth who's been convicted of an armed felony offense is eligible if the court determines that mitigating circumstances exist. Okay. And in that circumstance, it's discretionary. Okay. So what do we have here? The defendant, in this case, Rivera, was convicted of a felony in 2007. Felony conviction. So now in 2010, when defendant was 17 years old, he was with other people and they had gotten into an argument about a parking spot with somebody, and he displayed a loaded firearm. He was arrested for CPW2, which is criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree, a felony. So let's think about this. He has a previous felony conviction. He's now charged with a felony. So he's not eligible. He's ineligible for that youthful offender treatment, even though he's 17, which would be right in the prime of that age range, 16, 17, 18. So he was sentenced in 2011 for that parking lot altercation as part of a negotiated plea as a second felony offender to 10 years of jail and 5 years of post-release supervision, which is a legal sentence. But after he was sentenced, that original 2007 conviction was vacated. It was vacated. It's as if it never happened. So all of a sudden, this legal sentence that he got as a second felony offender was now an illegal sentence because he doesn't have a previous conviction. He's not a second felony offender. So he had to get brought back from jail, back to the court, and he had to be resentenced under his felony conviction. But remember, he doesn't have a previous felony conviction. So now he's theoretically eligible to get youthful offender treatment. But what he's charged with is an armed felony offense. So it's discretionary. So he asks to be considered for youthful offender treatment at the resentencing hearing. The judge listened to his application, and the judge identified properly the 2 ways he could get it. There's 2 ways you can get it, even if you're charged with an armed felony offense, but it's discretionary. The first is that there's mitigating circumstances that bear directly on the manner in which the crime was committed. The second is if the defendant was the sole participant and his role was relatively minor, but not so minor as to be a defense to the crime charged. So the judge goes through these different factors, but he says 2 things that to the defendant seem a problem. He says, this was an armed felony, and this is the quote, as such, there are aggravating factors as opposed to mitigating factors. The defendant later on appeals and says that meant that per se an armed felony offense precluded mitigating factors. What did the court also say? The court said it did not find any mitigating factors that required youthful offender adjudication. The defendant appealed and said, that's a misunderstanding. It's discretionary, not required. The court, after hearing the arguments of the defendant, said, I'm not giving you youthful offender treatment, and I'm going to resentence you to the same exact thing that the judge gave you before. 10 years jail, 5 years post-release supervision. So the defendant appeals and says the judge messed up in the ways that we just described. And the appellate division affirmed the sentencing, and it goes to the Court of Appeals. And they say, yes, the judge may have been inartful in the way he described the standards, but it's clear the court properly considered the youthful offender statute requirements and the factors that may allow the judge to grant youthful offender treatment and rejected it. So the court considered it and rejected it, and that's all the judge has to do. So here, there were not mitigating circumstances to support the YO adjudication, given the threatening manner in which the defendant used the gun. Sentencing affirmed. And that's the case of People versus Rivera. Have a good day. If you like what you just saw and want to see more just like it, please hit like or subscribe to let me know.